today. Excited to have you all here for our October Professional Learning Power Hour. I'll do a little bit of framing and some introductions in a moment, and then we'll go ahead and get started. We will make sure that we leave time at the end for questions, so certainly you are welcome to submit your questions through the Q&A as they come to you, and we will do our best to make sure that they all get addressed during this time. If for some reason there are some pressing questions that we're not able to get to, we will make sure that we follow up with you. So we've got some familiar faces and some new faces today. So just want to take a moment to introduce you all to Rivet Education if you are new to us. At Rivet Education, our vision for K-12 education is that every educator receives the best resources and support available to provide all students with the educational opportunities they want and deserve. And the way that we contribute to this vision is by defining high-quality professional learning and also creating tools and resources that support state and local education agencies in putting that definition into practice for teachers. And one of the ways that we do that is with our framework for high-quality professional learning. Our definition of high-quality professional learning was informed by latest research, and we capture it here in this framework. And you see it's got three main components. The base of it are the overarching components of high-quality professional learning. These are going to be consistent across all types of curriculum-based professional learning. And then you see in the middle, we define the four types of professional learning. This is the learning that is needed to support the effective use of high quality instructional materials. It includes adoption, ongoing for teachers, launch and systems design and leadership support. And then at the top, you see that we've got the structures that can be leveraged to provide educators with the professional learning they want and need. And so this framework guides all of Rivet's work, including our Professional Learning Partner Guide. So analogous to what EdReports does for curriculum, the Professional Learning Partner Guide, also referred to as the PLPG, the goal is to make it easy for school and district leaders to find organizations who've proven that they provide high-quality professional learning. And so all of the organizations featured in the Professional Learning Partner Guide have passed through our rigorous selection process. And so with that in mind, I want to actually orient you all to why we're here today. This is the second in our series of 5 professional learning power hours focused on navigating the instructional materials journey. And so just to give you all some orientation to that journey and where we are with it, in September, we discussed the exploration phase in the instructional materials implementation journey. That was where stakeholders came together to review and select a new curriculum. So once that curriculum is adopted and purchased, the next phase of the journey involves creating conditions for successful curriculum launch so that school leaders, teachers, and ultimately students and families experience success. And so at Rivet Education, we refer to that as program installation, and that's what we're going to be focusing on today. So as districts prepare for the initial implementation of their high-quality instructional materials, the main focus is on establishing or updating processes, procedures that are going to support this program installation phase. So in this phase, teachers first have access to the high-quality instructional materials. They participate in their initial training. And the leaders, the district and school leaders, are establishing or revising systems and structures to support implementation. And there's a lot that happens in this phase. And so in today's session, we're really going to focus on what's happening at the district leadership phase. So both district leaders and the implementation team really begin to facilitate the enabling conditions for strong implementation. So as you can see, this includes ensuring, of course, that the HQIM are adopted, purchased, and distributed. This can include removing old materials from schools and classrooms. They're focusing on establishing and investing stakeholders in a plan for materials implementation that connects to the district's vision for excellent and equitable teaching and learning. And this investment is established through that initial curriculum-based professional learning to teachers for the new HQIM. And they're also working on creating proper conditions for strong implementation. So this includes examining district resources and structures, processes, policies, as well as making necessary changes to ensure that all students can access the curriculum equitably. So I'm very excited to be joined today by two guests. We have Josh DeBoard, who is the Chief Academic Officer with Barbourville Independent School District in Kentucky. And I'm also joined by Corey Hamner, who is the Coach Impact Lead of System Services for Achievement Network. So thank you so much for joining me today. Corey, I'm going to turn things over to you for a minute to just give us a little bit of an overview of the work that you all do at ANet.
Great. Thanks so much for having us today. So at the Achievement Network, or ANet for short, we partner with school districts and schools all across the country to create classrooms where every student can thrive. So in my role, I get the honor of partnering with school districts and working with leaders like Josh to support district level staff around their instructional strategy related to assessments, curriculum, coaching, professional learning. So excited to talk more today about what that looks like with high quality instructional materials.
Excellent.
Yeah, and this next slide just has a little bit around the things that we do when we typically support district leaders in selecting and implementing high quality instructional materials. So you can just see the key elements of our process here. And I would say like the through line for all of these critical elements is purposeful stakeholder engagement and ongoing communication, which you mentioned earlier. So we're often thinking about specific roles for system leaders, school leaders, and teachers, and just asking ourselves like, what's working, what isn't, how can we adjust? So yeah, we're excited to dig in more in just to set up our work in Kentucky. We worked with the Kentucky Department of Education to support school districts that apply to be a part of a pilot. The Department of Ed was really hoping for more school districts to implement high quality instructional materials so they could apply to be a part of this pilot, where we supported them in selecting those high quality instructional materials, setting up, like we're going to talk more about today, and implementing them. So we were their partners over the course of 2 years in doing that.
Excellent. Well, I'm excited to dig in with you all. I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen for this next section, since this is really just a conversation between us so that we can all have a chance to learn a little bit more about your work. So I want to start out with, Corey, hearing a little bit about how does ANet approach this phase of implementation and how you came to you told us a little bit about partnering with our guest LEA with Josh and Barbourville, but would love to hear a little bit about, again, your approach and that partnership.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, we felt really fortunate to work with the Department of Education, and they were really thinking through how can we best support districts in taking on this endeavor. So like I mentioned, we help them think through, what does an application look like? What do districts have to commit to? And districts like Barbourville apply to be a part of that. So through those 2 years, and again, we were working very closely with the Department of Education. We trained a set of district and a mix actually of district and school leaders around the process for selection, best practices for implementing, setting up implementation. So we would do some whole group learning together. And then ANet, as a coach, we worked with school districts to think about, what is your particular context? And how can we take this learning and apply it to your particular students, schools, and really set up some of those systems and structures. So it was a fun 2-year process. And then in year 2, we were obviously like there in classrooms, like really supporting the implementation of that. But we were excited to partner with Barbourville. They applied to be a part of that work and a part of the pilot. So
Excellent. And we'll get into some of all the details of some of the work that you all did together. But Josh, I'd love for you to give us just a little bit about your, a little bit about your journey of that initial implementation. What was it that prompted you to change the materials? And what was it that made you really want to apply to the pilot and be part of this work with ANet?
Well, first, let me say thank you for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. And working with ANet and KDE along the way has been an amazing journey for us. It really started at a good time. We had a decent amount of turnover, both with faculty and at the administration end. We had a new superintendent. I was in a new role as chief academic officer. We had a new head principal for our district. So it came at a time that really worked in well with what we were hoping to do. We needed something that would allow every student in our district, especially coming off the COVID years, to be able to succeed at a high level. So what we want to do, and this is going to kind of set the stage for, I think, the rest of our conversation, but we decided to focus on ELA because the English language arts really had that, and math had taken the biggest hits over the COVID time period that we had seen and throughout the state, really, not just with our district. So we needed something that would allow us. Now, we're kind of a special situation. We are a single school district, so we have preschool through 12th grade at one campus, in one block area. So this allowed us to set the stage for a continuation going from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. And we'll talk more about that as we move forward, but with our ELA team. And it allowed us to see what have we been using, what has been working in the past, but more importantly, what is a unified goal that we can have where every single student is able to achieve whatever their potential may be. And through this process, it is a process that can be replicated over time. We have now done it with math. We are doing it with science at the moment, and we're moving forward with other disciplines as well at this time.
Yeah, I appreciate you noting that this is a process that can work across disciplines. So yes, we'll be talking about your ELA experience, but certainly if you are joining us and you're thinking about what this looks like for math or what this may look like for science, it's going to be very similar. So, we're really focusing in on that period of time today, thinking about like you've made the decision on the materials you're going to adopt. We're getting ready to install it. And I think, one of the things that I often think about is that sometimes there can be that, okay, great, we've decided to adopt these materials, like check, we've done the thing, we've made the decision. And as you know from your experience, that's not really how it goes. There's still a lot of work to be done once that happens. So really, my next question is both for you, Corey, and Josh, to hear a little bit about sort of the approach that you have to supporting districts and schools and leaders with that initial rollout, and would love to hear about some of those common systems and structures that are often addressed in that initial work of implementation.
Sure, I'm happy to lead here. I think I would say the biggest thing that we always start with is setting goals for the work. So really thinking about what do we want to be true in a year's time after we select materials? Where are we going? What do we want to be true for students, teachers, leaders, district leaders too? And I think that really sets the stage for setup and implementation to say, so what do we need to put in place as a first step to make that happen? So a lot of times after we set those goals, so then we start thinking about what structures are in place, what enabling conditions are going to be ready to set us up to achieve this. So a lot of times that's thinking through, do you have PLCs in place? That's going to be a major mode for learning and understanding the materials and discussing them with peers and colleagues. So oftentimes we're making sure those are set up. So if they're not, spend some time there early on. What's our PLC schedule? What does this look like? If districts have those in place, great. Let's keep rolling. So also thinking through, is there an instructional leadership team in place? Is that clear? A support team that's going to support teachers. Another piece is professional learning days and times. Do you have time allocated especially before school starts, to train teachers so they understand how to find the materials, how to access them as a starting place? So those are some of the structures that we want to make sure are set up at the beginning. And if they're not, want to take some early steps to get those set up.
Yeah. Josh, I'd love to hear, some sort of specifics of what that looked like for your districts. What were some of those initial systems and structures that you all examined? And, what were the sort of specific things that came up as either like a stop doing or a start doing or a keep doing as you rolled this out?
Okay, absolutely. Before that, I would like to say, though, I cannot stress enough how important teacher buy-in is to rolling out any type, much less high quality curriculum and instruction. What we did from day one, as soon as we found out we were part of the pilot, within 3 days, we pulled together our entire district ELA team and told them, this is what we're hoping to move forward with. We really want to do that. And they were on board almost immediately, because if you have that teacher buy-in, especially at that base level, and they understand, because they're the one in the trenches, they're the one going to be using this material on a daily basis. So bringing them together, we asked them to create a list. What resources do you currently use? What is your primary, your secondary, your tertiary, on down of list of resources? Now let's look and see, okay, these are all the resources you have in your classroom. What is useful? What is not useful? What is working? Why is it working? Then we actually took it a step further. And if I'm going too long, please tell me. But we took it a step further. What we really wanted to do was to create a thorough ELA philosophy entire. So we came up with a list of 3 to 7, ended up being 5 priorities that we wanted to see ELA implement across the district. And then from that, we created a full living document of what is our priorities for every student at every grade level when they progress from 1st grade to 2nd grade, 7th grade to 8th grade, 10th grade to 11th grade. What do they need to know coming in? What do they need to be able to achieve, be able to create leaving at that grade level? We had PLCs in place. PLCs are wonderful. They work very well, especially at looking at what are you doing in the classroom? What's coming next? What's the assessment? What do we need to reteach? But something we did not have in place, and this has completely changed the way our admin team looks at after school meetings, which we don't have a whole lot, but what we do now is vertical alignment meetings. Because our people very rarely get a chance to sit down with a 1st grade English teacher if you're the 11th and 12th grade honors English teacher. But this gives us once a month, we come together and see what is going well, what is working, especially now with the implementation of the resources. But the PLCs combined with the vertical alignment teams has really risen everything we wanted to do for ELA. Now, we also do this for math, we do this for social studies, we do this for science as a result of this pilot that we did with ANet and KDE. But like I said, I really cannot stress enough, when the teachers know that these are going to be our resources. We used ed reports, we vetted them. I allowed people to go out on their own and say, here's a list of, I think it was 7 to 10 resources. To these, take a week, dig in, come back and give me your top 2. Well, we ended up going with Study Sync ELA, and everyone that came back had it as either number 1, or a few people had it as number 2. Meeting what they were getting into. And then using this process, they were so happy to be able to get the material ahead of time. And then I actually vetted each one of the vendors and was able to secure the ability to get 6 years of own in with our actual purchasing of the curriculum. And that has been a lifesaver. Not only do we have an in-person PD with our vendor, but throughout the year, 3 to 4 times, they check in with us. What is going right? Do you have questions? And we can have one-on-one conversations, be it email or virtually. Has been really a game changer for us.
Yeah, that's excellent. I think, there's just a couple of things that I'm hearing that I want to make sure I lift up. Like, one, that communication piece is key. Like making sure that everybody understands this is what's happening, this is why it's happening, this is how it's going to happen. And the fact that you understood that like this was going to take some years. And so you're thinking about like, I think we often think about like with new materials, yes, we want to make sure, of course, our teachers have that initial training, but you're also thinking about, okay, so what can I make sure that I have in place so that teachers are continuing to get the support that they need year after year. You mentioned that you already had PLCs in place and that you were doing some vertical alignment. Is there anything that had to change around your PLC structure or expectations that you set around them now that you had everybody using this one common resource?
Well, one issue we do face being such a small district is quite often you are not in a PLC with other ELA members. So the structure of the PLC did not necessarily change. I would say the biggest impact on our PLCs is now the amount of time that our principals spend with teachers worrying about reteaching, looking at what was not achieved during this past unit. We often spend time looking at assessment, doing anything, but actually taking the time to go back and see, okay, this wasn't met to our level. How do we ensure before we start that every child we can reaches that level so we can continue forward on the same plane?
Yeah, that's super helpful thing, Bat. And that's helpful context, and I think that just sort of underscores your talk earlier about the vertical systems and why that was so important, because teachers now had that content piece.
Yeah, we had a teacher that is 26 years in, 19 years with us. And he said, I'm pretty sure this is the first time I've ever been able to sit down with just the ELA of the elementary and us talk about what is going on as a district-wide phenomenon within the ELA.
Yeah. I think that it's content specific, it's HQIM specific, and so really getting a chance to have that time and that collaboration. I'd love to hear a little bit about, what are some of the roadblocks, either that, Josh, that you can talk about that you encountered in this early phase of implementation as teachers are first getting to know the materials, and Corey, if there are, sort of other common roadblocks that, a district might want to be aware of as they're thinking about, like, okay, we've made the decision, we're rolling out the materials, what do we need to expect in this point?
Okay. I'll start if that's okay. What we saw, honestly, and I know people are so tired of talking about COVID, but during COVID, that learning loss that we had, not only was it the learning loss, I think the biggest, and I think this will be long-term impact, is the amount of rigor that has gone down within classes as a result of COVID, and has even continued after, because they weren't able to get this, they weren't able to get this, so we need to meet them at their level. I don't think that's true. I think we need to set the level and be able to help them rise up. It is my very strong opinion that as an administrator, my job is to remove whatever roadblocks I can from our school level administration team. And it's the job of the school level administration team to remove those roadblocks for the teachers. And then most importantly, it is the job of the teachers to remove those roadblocks from the students who are in their class. So the real issue we saw was students weren't used to that amount of reading and writing because of the past few years. But having them go through it again and again, and to see that process, and we are able to see this because we do bi-monthly student surveys. Now this year we've decided to move it to a 6 month. So we're probably only going to do 2 this year. But for the first year and a half of the implementation, monthly surveys with students, with teachers, with families. See what is different than before. What are you enjoying? What are you struggling with? And then we can look especially at those struggles and see how can we help the students overcome the struggles that they are having within their classroom. We've set up a model where it's really learn, lead, and then explore. The first couple of years, it doesn't matter if you're a 20-year teacher or if you're a brand new teacher, you are going to use the high quality local curriculum exactly as it is. Then hopefully we get those people who can, after they've learned, lead and help their colleagues to move through it. Now, we're not in this final stage, but probably the start of next year or the following year, we will allow some of those leaders to say, hey, I think it would be great if I can supplement this piece of work or whatever piece of work that StudySync is using. But that will be on a very limited basis, especially moving forward. The idea of everyone, no matter where you're at, student and teacher, is starting and learning together and going through this experience together. It is so crucial in how we see it as a family here at Barberville.
Connected to what Josh shared, a lot of times we see the new curriculum isn't maybe more rigorous than teachers have taught in the past. And so one of the roadblocks we see play out is pacing. So teachers are feeling like kids aren't getting it. They're starting to slow down, stretch out lessons. And so typically one of those roadblocks is, they're not moving through the units or the modules as quickly as they need to. And so that's a very common roadblock we see early on. And so I think it's important to try to guard against that. I think there's a reality to that. But like one of the ways that we help districts pre-plan for that or guard against it is to think about the spiraling that happens. So if like standards, especially for ELA, are taught again and again throughout each unit. So really helping teachers see, when does a standard appear in which unit? So you can take like a deep breath to know, like, this is not the only time students are going to be grappling with point of view. They may not have gotten it in the first unit, but we're going to get it again here in this unit and this unit. So I think that helps give a little confidence for continuing to move forward, even when teachers are feeling like kids aren't quite getting it. So that would be one thing I would say. The other common roadblock oftentimes, especially for district leaders, is like Josh shared, like kids are behind, but how do we know what they're learning and where they're struggling? And I think implementing new curriculum can be tough, right? Just like teaching it. And then there's an element of like, and how do I know kids are getting it? And that often comes with assessments, which we see in high quality curriculum, curriculum embedded assessments that are high quality. But I think a lot of times, like, that's a whole nother implementation barrier. Like, do I give it on, do I do the online one? Do I print it on paper? How am I rolling up how kids are doing as a CAO, as a district leader? How do I know? And so I would say one of the structures in the early phases that we try to help districts think through too is that assessment piece. What are the expectations around giving the assessments in the curriculum? Will they be on paper? Will you use a lot of the high quality curricula, have an online component? You got to train teachers how to use it. You got to get kids rostered. Like, it's a whole, and that needs to happen early on, like ideally before school starts. But so I think we like to help district leaders think through those pieces. So as implementation continues, you get a few months down the road, you're not fighting the battle of those pieces, but you're able to actually pull up and say, okay, how are kids doing? Where might they be struggling? And then helping teachers think through, to Josh's point earlier too, what's coming through in the next unit? What do I need to hit harder on an instruction because kids didn't get it? Where can I maybe go a little bit faster to help my pacing because kids got it in the last unit? So there's that element of gathering data and being able to reflect on it that I think you can try to get ahead of early as well.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I like the, sort of being specific about some of those logistical challenges as well, of like, let's make sure everybody is rostered. Let's make sure everybody understands, not just we have new materials, but here's how they're actually going to be used and those resources around them.
I think that really goes back to the idea that it takes a full team. It's not just the leadership. It's not just the teachers. It's not just the students. It's your technology department. It's your partnering with ANet, with KDE, with specific things, maybe different grants to help you achieve a one-to-one if you're not already there technology-wise. It is that one, it's the whole child approach, but it's also the whole district approach, because no one person or no one group can achieve these things. It has to be a group rowing together in the same direction to be able to achieve that.
Yeah, that's such an important point. This is a team thing. I want to dig in a little bit to one of the points that you made, Josh, that I really appreciated was, district leader removes roadblock for school leader removes roadblock for teachers, and on down. And so, as you mentioned, like, it's a whole team. And so now you have a district team, you've got a school leader team, and, they're really taking on an instructional leadership role. And so I'd really like to hear, Corey, both from, how does ANet prepare districts for this? And Josh, your experience of, what was the work that was done to really set everybody up as an instructional leader as well for this work?
I'm happy to kick us off. I think one of the things that we really seek to support district leaders and school leaders that we're working with, but really at the district level, is creating a theory of action around. So Josh described the process they went through to set an instructional vision. What's important to us about ELA instruction in this case? What are our priorities? What do we want to see in classrooms? Of course, using that vision to select aligned materials, but also using that vision to say, what do we have to do to realize this vision? And so I think that takes thinking through, and oftentimes we take folks through starting with students. So if we're living out this vision, what do we see students doing in classrooms? How are they feeling? What are they experiencing? And then to say, you know, so what do teachers have to do to set conditions for that? We want to see teachers, you know, skillfully accessing the materials, planning purposefully with them, analyzing their data, all of those things. Back up to say, like, so what do school leaders have to be doing? They have to make space for learning to happen for teachers. They have to, you know, ensure systems like we were talking about for data are in place. Backing up to district leaders. So what do we have to do at the district level to set conditions for this to happen for school leaders? We have to train them. We have to, you know, do X, Y, Z. So I really think that cascading is so important. Like you described, Josh, of like, we have to knock down barriers for each other. And I do think that takes some aligned planning on the front end before you get to implementation to say, our theory of action is if district leaders do this, then school leaders will do this, then teachers will do this, and we will see this for students.
I think that's very accurate and very succinctly put together. What we did was actually, with ANet's help, with Ramon's help specifically, we created our own INI, our own implementation impact checks and walkthroughs for the ELA, separate from other, whether it be, you know, elementary, middle school, or high school, or separate from other content areas even. And we did it a little different than I've seen it done in other places. And I'm sure other places also do it the same way, but when I came in, or when a district leader came into the school for that, we would ask the principal to walk us around as if it were the first day we had ever been there, take us to, allow us to see what is going on, what is being achieved within these rooms. I think it's also important for the district leaders to let school leaders know, and for school leaders to let teachers know, and then most importantly for teachers to let students know it's okay to fail. We worried about failure. And I understand why. We worry about, can we get through talking about pacing guides? We worry about, are we going to be able to get what we need for that assessment at the end of the year? But if we don't let students fail, they're not going to be able to improve in the way we want them to improve. Sometimes teachers fail, and we've all seen the teachers, we all talk to them like, oh, that was the worst lesson I've ever taught. I wish you hadn't been here today. That's okay. What did you do well about that? And more importantly, what can you learn from this to take forward with you? But those INI checks that we now do about once every 6 to 8 weeks, depending, it is very instrumental, because then we come back as a district leadership team, have a conversation, then we bring the school principals in one at a time and allow them to present, what did you see today? What is going right? What is achieving those priorities that we set out almost 2.5 years ago now for our ELA to look like? And having those very honest, very open conversations, both with numbers, but also what did you see today that you want to be able to replicate moving forward, was really crucial now in the process. Those same types for math and for science moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, that like there's consistently that checking in, and you had to put those systems in place in order for that to happen. I'd love to hear a little bit about the work that you did to make sure that that was really specific to, in your case, Study Sync. How did you make sure that as you're doing your walkthroughs, as you're talking about what is next, you're making sure that you're really also being rooted in your HQIM?
A lot of that dealt with how much time is literally spent with the high quality material that we're doing. How much time do they spend reading? How much time do they spend discussing? How much time do they spend program? And you can't get just going in the classroom as a snapshot. Every day is different. So yes, maybe one day it is only 30% of the time they're in the program because the kids really jumped on that discussion bandwagon that day. Feel important thoughts about whatever they're reading on. Days, it may be closer to 70% spent with the material because this is a reading day. This is an organized day. This is a day where you read this, and you comparing what you learn from this period of time. So it really depends on when you're going into a classroom. But the beauty of it is, if you take the long view of it, if you take the entire year's I&I checks, entire year's conversation with students, with surveys from parents, with surveys from, we don't do this now because obviously community members aren't in, but before we ever selected a quality resource, we actually had community input as well. Now, we didn't have as many community obviously, but we wanted that input from what do you in the business world see that we may be short when people graduate from Barberville. So it's really that idea of taking the long view of it and making sure that everyone understands that this is our resource and that's the learn, then lead. We're going to learn how to use this resource exactly intended. We vetted it through ed reports. We vetted it by talking to different administrators and teachers. ANet was able to put me in touch with not only people in Kentucky, but people throughout the entire nation that were either using or pondering using the exact same high quality materials and resources that we used. And that really gave us, I think, a leg up as well.
Yeah, that's so great to hear. And, I think your point about really understanding the materials, as a leader, so that as you're going into classrooms, you understand that, like you said, like it's just a snapshot, it's one moment in time. But when you understand the full view of the materials, it's so much easier to say, like, what I'm seeing is aligned with what we would expect to see with those materials. Yeah. Corey, I'd love to hear, from the sort of larger perspective. Are there other sorts of tools or resources that districts should think about revising or, implementing in this early phase so that they're thinking about, we've talked a little bit about like the logistics piece, the communication piece, but those other tools that they should think about in this initial implementation phase that might need some revision or some reworking?
Sure. Yeah, I think the walkthrough is so important. I would also say, one of the things that we push districts to think about is their lesson planning structure. So typically, at least in a lot of the districts I've worked with, teachers submit a lesson plan, right? And there's usually a template, like here's the objective, here's my activities, here are all the things that I'm doing. With high quality instructional materials, to Josh's point, we really want to see like a lot of that is in there for you. Teachers don't have to create their activities. They're not having to pull from Google and, we don't need to know that in this template because it's here. And to your point about walkthroughs as a district or school leader, like we have access to everything's online. We can pull it up. We can see what's happening or what should be happening in the classroom according to the lesson for the day. And so we really encourage districts to think about what are your current policies or, expectations for lesson planning submission, and how might those need to change based on the fact that you're using high quality materials where a lot of this is actually done for the teacher. And again, it's not that it doesn't take, we still want teachers, I think you all know this, but like, you can't just open it up and start teaching, right? We actually want teachers to spend less time pulling and Googling and Pinteresting. And we want teachers to really understand, what am I trying to accomplish today or in this unit with my students? And how am I going to implement what's here? And so oftentimes that leads us away from a copy and paste template, because that's not a good use of anyone's time. Like, let me copy and paste these activities from this online program that I have. Because I can pull those up and see it. Let's actually help teachers to internalize what is here, deeply understand the standard, what students should be learning today, how these activities and questions will get them there. And there may need to be some prioritizing based on that. Like, sometimes like, oh, you're probably not going to have time to ask these 10 questions. What are the 3 most important ones? Like, that's the level of planning that we want to see teachers doing. And so sometimes that takes us away from a template and takes us to annotations, right? I work with a school district that really just expects teachers to like capture pictures of their notes and their annotations on printed materials. So a school leader can walk in and say, I see what you're doing, and I see, how you've internalized it and how you plan to implement this with your students. Or that might look like answering a set of questions. So a leader might know, what lesson are you on? What should I pull up? And how have you internalized this? How are you taking this to your students? So I think it can take different forms, but oftentimes it does require a revision of the way that we've been expecting teachers to lesson plan. And that's a shift for everybody. It's a shift for leaders. It's a shift for teachers. And in a lot of ways, just makes their practice and the time that they spend more effective for students.
If I could piggyback that just for 1 second, we really changed. We submit a weekly lesson plan. Ours now is more based around the idea of here are your standards, here is your material. How does it connect and what does that end product look like? It's not a detailed list, as you were saying, because any of them now with these high quality materials, they could either just print it off and turn it in or copy and paste it into a form if we require them to put it in a form. And we saw almost immediately there's no need for this. It's not helping them. It's not helping us. It's not helping the students. So the ability, and I think the one thing every teacher would say with the curriculum and instruction material that we have chosen at Barberville is time. It has allowed them the time to dig into whatever the subject matter ELA that they're going to be reading, whether it's a story, a short story, whatever it may be. It allows them to dig into that and use the resources instead of going out and trying to find, I need 5 resources for X, Y, and Z. Now, those are all right there with you. What can I do with them? How can we take it to that next level? How can we make that rigor keep up, and up?
Yeah, that's so helpful to think about. I have one last question for me to pose before I open it up for questions from our participants. So participants, if you have questions, please feel free to start dropping them either into the chat or into the Q&A. You know, we spent most of our time talking about what was the work at the district level. So we wanted to make sure that people understood there's, you know, there is that work that needs to happen in between that adoption decision and day one of school. And we've talked a lot about like the logistical pieces and the, you know, systems and structures that we've had to think about. But because this phase also includes, you know, that initial teacher training as well, I'd like to hear just a little bit about, you know, what did that initial teacher training look like? And then how did that help you think about the PL plan that you had? You mentioned you had, you know, the 6-year piece, but what were you sort of thinking about in that initial year?
Absolutely. Again, we were lucky enough that I dealt directly with the vendor and I did not do this past year, but 2 years ago when we were in the first summer of the implementation phase, I actually personalized, well, I didn't personalize. I allowed the teachers to personalize with me their learning plan. Now the ELA looked different from social studies and math and everything. We were lucky to be able to get Study Sync, to have someone on site with us for 2 days. And then, as I said, multiple virtual check-ins throughout the year. But having that 2 days, about 2.5 weeks before school started, was a time period where they could sit down in day one, literally have an unboxing of here's the material, here's the resources with it, here's your printed copy, here's what the online copy looks like. And then it allowed for day 2 to be some of that higher level. What do you need to be able to reach your students? How can we scale this material? Look at what the material itself allows you to do to meet the needs of a gifted, talented student in the same classroom with a student who may struggle with ELA. And how can we differentiate for all of those people within there? Because it's not a shotgun approach. Everything doesn't work exactly the same for every student, a single individual or single teacher, but the ability for them to be together in one place with the material, with the technology, with an instructor who knew what they had to offer, you know, like the back of their hand, and a full day, and then a kind of a breathing in between that, and then coming back and saying, what are the higher level things? And then they were able to use that and explore with that, because what I did was create them a third PD day where all they did was work together to dig in themselves to the material and set up their first 2 weeks of what they're doing within their classroom. And it was such, and I think this again goes back to my first point. If the teachers aren't involved from day one, you are probably going to have a fight on your hands. If teachers are involved and they know we are the ones that selected this, we know why we selected it, and this is what's best for our students, they're willing to go that extra mile day after day. And I see them here after school. I see them here before school. I see them here spending extra time with the PD, both in the summer and sometimes throughout the school year. And that really enabled us to be able to hit the ground running. And then year 2, the summer between the second year after initial implementation, we were able to have them back with us for 1 day and then another virtual day. Had one new teacher, so we spent the first half of that day unboxing with that individual kind of one-on-one, while the more experienced teachers were able to work together to revamp. What do we need to change from last year that will allow us to have those students succeeding at the level they're able to?
Yeah. Thank you. That's so helpful to hear about. And, I think I just really appreciate that you mentioned like the actual unboxing of the materials. Like, I have this new resource. You want to make sure that teachers are really using it fully, embracing it. And so spending time actually taking a look at, this is the resource. This is everything that it contains. This is what it means and what it's going to look like in your classrooms. I don't think that can be underestimated. Well, I would love to open this up to questions from the group. One thing that I see coming in is, we've mentioned communication is key. And Josh, you talked about how you were able to bring all of your teachers together. And certainly, it sounds like in your district, that's a smaller group. And so one of the questions is, any advice around communication, particularly if it is a larger group, or if you don't have people who are bought in right away, what are some things to sort of keep in mind around those communication best practices?
I think there's a district level, if you have a very large district, bring everyone together, or you can for one time, but it's not something you're going to be able to repeat time and time again. But what you can do is either have, depending on the size of even a high school, maybe so large you can't bring everybody together, but you could have a leadership team within that subject that you are looking to adopt. Now, if at all possible, it's much better to bring everyone within that building at least together to have the conversation. And this may seem counterproductive, and this is not something we actually had to deal with the ELA, but it is something I have helped to deal with. Sometimes if you do have to just choose a leadership team instead of bringing everyone together, you want to make sure to get that one person who is usually the biggest naysayer or that doesn't change to be a part of that leadership team. Because if they're a part of the team and you can sell it to them in a way where this is you, this is not the district telling you this is what you're going to use. This is you all knowing your students, knowing your content, knowing where you are statistically, and being able to say, this is the material that is best for our students. And if you can get one of those people to take ownership of that, especially someone who is typically, not a roadblock, but a roadblock or a naysayer doesn't like, you can bring them on. Sometimes it is people who have 25, 30 years of experience. We have a teacher with 26 years of experience, and he is blown away, and it's very difficult to impress him, but he has been so impressed with the high quality material that we will be able to bring on board that he's telling, now he wasn't a problem anyway, but he was willing to tell anybody, listen, how well this is working for our students.
That's helpful. Thanks. Yeah, Corey, go ahead.
I love that. One thing that I would add to is we support districts. We really encourage them to have a communication plan. And usually that starts like before you even select the material, but really continuing through implementation. So at this phase saying, what are the key messages I need to send? Who do I need to send them to? What's the best mode and who's going to communicate them? I think are some of those key components of planning. And to Josh's point, especially with some of my districts, we would start out by saying like, what do you anticipate are going to be the roadblocks already? What are your naysayers going to say? And part of that is like, yes. Oh, I want to use what we've always been using, or I don't like this text, or I want a lesson plan the way I've always done it, and I think trying to be proactive around the messages that you want to send and the rationale for the changes is a huge part of any change management. But I think having that communication plan, planning around those barriers that you're hearing or you anticipate hearing can be key throughout the entire process.
And oftentimes for us, it's going back to what were the ELA priorities that you all established now 2+ years ago that we wanted to make sure that we can have across the entire district. And by bringing people back to the priorities that they created, they're reminded that, oh yes, we needed, this is what we wanted, and this is why we moved this direction to begin with.
Yeah. This has all been so helpful, as I think about, we're just about towards the end of our time together. I appreciate that we've covered so many different things, the logistics, the communication, the teacher training, the revising resources and systems like walkthrough so that they're grounded in our materials. I have one last question for each of you, and that is, what would be one piece of advice you would give to a district who is in this phase of, we have made the decision to adopt, and we're going to be, rolling out professional learning to our teachers, in the coming weeks? Like, what that sort of period of time there, what's one thing that you want to make sure a district leader sort of knows or understands about that time?
I would just say, like, leading with the why is so important. As a former district leader who rolled out a high quality curriculum to over 200 schools, like, we made a misstep. We just jumped right into training. Like, here's your new material. Like, here's how you use it. Aren't you so excited? And I think that folks were like, why are we doing this? Where is this coming from? And so hopefully, to Josh's example, you brought them all along. But I think even regardless, the lesson that we learned was like, let's back up. Let's always lead with the why high quality instructional materials are important, how they support our vision and our priorities. Like you mentioned, Josh, what benefits do we see? And just constantly coming back to that, I think, is so important, because change is hard. Implementing new instructional materials is hard, and it's easy to get lost in those details. And I'm trying to find my lesson plan, and I'm trying to learn a new way to teach math in this curriculum, and what's an array? There's just, you can get so lost and not see the forest from the trees. So I would just say, like, always leading with the why and starting there, I think, can be really beneficial for everybody.
That's great. Thanks, Corey.
To always be going back to whatever that priority is, whatever that goal is. Why did we decide to do this to begin with? And I know it's been said probably 50 times during this meeting, but it's communication. That line of communication, and it has to be two-way communication. It can't be, here's a message sent down on high from the district level or even the school level leadership team. It has to be a two-way conversation between, actually it's more than two ways, but a two-way conversation between the admin team and the school leaders and the teachers. And then it's a conversation between the teachers and whatever group is putting on the professional learning for you to make sure working for you. That sounds kind of harsh, but they are working for you. Make sure they understand, here is our goal. Here is our priority. This is what we need out of this training. We need it set up in a certain manner, or maybe at a certain time, or whatever the case may be. And then to keep communicating that goal and going back to, why are we doing this? What was the reason? We came in and we could have got a lot of pushback because our scores were very high before we changed to the high quality curriculum. So it would have been very easy for some of the teachers to say, hey, why are we bothering doing this at all? We have a 55, 60, 65% proficiency rate in ELA at the high school level. Why would we bother to change? And the question is, we're always looking not for the next best thing, but for the best thing for our students. And our students are going to look different from an inner city school somewhere in Chicago or New York. And that's going to look different from a school in Florida or Texas. So you really have to know what you want out of it, and then be able to communicate what you want out of it to those professional learning people so they can help you achieve those goals you set up.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen again as we get ready to close out. And just, of course, want to reiterate my thank you to you, Josh and Corey, for coming today, sharing your story, sharing your work. There were so many great nuggets that came out of this, of, what are the things that we want to think about. As we get ready to close out, I just want to point out a couple of resources that we have from Rivet. I mentioned that we had our framework for high quality professional learning. We also encourage you to visit Rivet Connect, which is our one-stop shop for all things related to, supporting the implementation of high-quality instructional materials. I mentioned at the start of the session the Professional Learning Partner Guide. So if you're on here as a district and you're thinking, gosh, we need to start doing this work and we need someone to be by our side, to have that expertise, I highly encourage you to go to the PLPG, where you can find that expert by your side. And of course, we also have the Professional Learning Partner Guidebook, and that's going to be useful in thinking about how you can select, interview, and manage your professional learning partner to really make sure that you're getting the high quality services that you want from this, as we saw happen today in our partnership. This was the second in our series of supporting the implementation journey. So I just want to remind everybody that our next Professional Learning Power Hour will be on Thursday, November 16th at 10 o'clock Central Time. And we will focus on the next phase of implementation, which we call that initial implementation. And we, of course, encourage you all to please reach out. You're welcome to reach out to me, welcome to reach out to info at any questions that you may have about this work and how we might be able to support you. Thank you again, Josh and Corey, for coming and sharing your story of how you work together for this, initial installation of StudySync. So great to hear about your work and all the exciting things that are happening for teachers and students in Barbourville.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to share my email address with anyone in the meeting. I'm happy to answer anything I can or provide any documentation that may be useful to your district.
We appreciate that. And we will be following up this session with an email with the recording and the slides. So certainly if anybody needs anything as a result of this session, please don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a good one.